if you are involved in a self-defense encounter, my number one first piece of advice, you need to win the race to 911. You need to call the police first.
Hey there, self-defenders. John Correa is proud to be an ambassador for Heckler and Koch pistols. The entire active self-protection team loves our HKs, knowing that we can drag them all over the country, shoot thousands of rounds a year through each one, subject them to very little care, and they will always go bang. Incredibly reliable and a joy to shoot. Please visit them at hk-usa.com, hk-usa.com, and tell them the Active Self-Protection Podcast sent you. Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am your host, Mike Williver, your favorite former Fed. With us today is my new friend, Paul Lathrop. He is the Deputy Director of New Media at Second Amendment Foundation, the Second Amendment Foundation, and he hosts a number of shows. Probably the most notable one for him is the Daily Bullet, which can be found Monday through Friday on the Second Amendment Foundation's Facebook page and YouTube channel. Paul, welcome. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for inviting me, man.
So this is kind of cool. I do interview Steve Gutowski. Folks, remember to stay tuned for that after this interview every week. And I just talked to an NPR reporter about his new book. So it's kind of cool getting to rub elbows with cool media types. So this is new to me. I feel like I'm all grown up now. Paul, what part of the country are you in?
I'm in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Okay. Yeah, we were talking before. I was just there not long ago for the Active Self-Protection in-person cohort for the instructor development class, and I really enjoyed it. Really nice people.
You couldn't pay me to live anywhere else in the country. People have tried, and yeah. I will not leave. I love it here.
Yeah, I don't know if you know Neil and Stephanie Widener, but okay, yeah, they feel the same way. They got a nice spread. You know, Neil's got I shouldn't say it on the air. Neil's got a range on his property now, just letting you know.
Yes.
So tell us, what you had a critical incident. You had a defensive use of a firearm. What led up to this?
At the time, I was a truck driver, and I was a seasoned truck driver. At that point, I'd had about 15 years of driving experience, and I was training other truck drivers. People had just gotten out of school. They had a CDL, but they weren't ready to drive their own truck yet. And so I was a driver trainer. I took them from, they just gotten their license to where they're ready to go out on their own and make money just in their own truck. I had a student, and we were stopping to fuel just west of Omaha, Nebraska when the incident occurred.
Yeah, just as a fun fact, I think people who've never been inside the cab of a big rig have no idea how complicated it is to operate one. You know, you don't just hop in, sit down, turn the key, throw it, and drive. There's about 18,000 gear levers and about 18,000 switches. It looks like the cockpit of an airplane.
It's not exactly jumping in grandma's Buick and running down to the grocery store. No,
it's not. Everything from how much distance you got to leave to how you change gears to how you go around a corner is different, and it's hard when you're first learning. I drove a bus years ago for the government for detainees. I did that for about 14 months, and going just to bus driver school was interesting and very enlightening. And that thing is just big. Other than that, it is kind of like driving a Buick. It's an automatic. You know, you just have, right foot on the gas or the brake, emergency brake, park, drive, reverse. It's just a much bigger vehicle. Tell us about the day of this event. You were instructing students at the time, and you were on the road near Omaha, Nebraska. And tell us what happened.
As I said, I had a student. He was doing very well. He was nearly ready to get his own truck, to the point where when a student just starts, I sit in the passenger seat the whole time, and I help them the entire time they're driving. When they're getting ready to get their own truck, then it's time to make some money. I let them drive, and I go in the back and I sleep. Then when they're done driving, I get in the driver's seat and they go in the back and sleep. And so that way the truck rolls 24/7. We're making money 24/7. Well, I was in the bunk, and my student had pulled into this Flying J truck stop, again, just west of Omaha. And we're going to put fuel on because we're on our way down to California. The next stop for fuel is in southern Utah. And so we had to get fuel before we got there. We weren't going to be able to make it the whole way to the next fuel stop. This is in mid-February, just about almost to almost to Valentine's Day.
So it's nice and warm and balmy in Nebraska.
Yeah, not quite so much.
Yeah, I wouldn't
Anyway, as we pull into the Flying J, my student picks a fuel lane that is empty and is between. There is a truck on the left of us fueling. There's a truck on the right of us fueling. Okay. Generally, when you fuel, you put fuel on, you pull forward till your truck is clear of the fuel island. You stop so that somebody can pull in behind you and start fueling. You go in, you use the bathroom, you do whatever you need, you get your fuel receipt, you do whatever you need to do, then you get out and you leave. That way the truck stop can be more efficient. People can get their fuel more quickly rather than waiting for you to go in and do everything you do, then come out before they can start fueling. It's courteous to both the fuel, the truck stop and the other drivers. It makes it faster for everybody if you do that.
Reminds me of a Costco. I don't know if you have a Costco membership or a Sam's Club, but just it drives me absolutely crazy when you're there waiting in line and the person in front of you, you've been waiting in line for 15 minutes and the person in front of you pulls up to the pump, checks their cell phone, gets out, stretches, fumbles around for their Costco card, gets back in their car, just sits there and puts the fuel pump back and then proceeds to sit there for another 5 minutes checking their phone. It's enough to drive me up a wall. So you guys had pulled in. And he aimed it for a particular pump, and then what happened?
Well, he says, I'm going to fuel. Do you need to use the bathroom? Do you need to get anything? And I very kind of groggily said, no, I'm good, man. He did fuel. And as he's finishing fueling, the truck on the right pulls forward and starts to pull out. And the way you pull out of this particular truck stop, you have to turn left and make a big circle around the pumps. Well, the truck started turning left, got to in front of us, and then stopped. And you could hear the chuff of the air, when the air brakes set.
Sure.
And my student finishes up, goes in, uses the bathroom, gets his receipt, whatever he's got, gets his snacks, whatever he's got to do, comes back out, gets in the truck. He says, we've got a problem. I open the curtain because there's a curtain between where the bunks are and the front of the truck. I open the curtain.
Okay.
I sit up, and there's a truck behind us now waiting for us to move so he can fuel. And I said, okay, well, let's try maneuvering around this guy so we can get out of here. We did a lot of maneuvering and could not get around. The driver was not in the driver's seat, was not, we couldn't, the video from the pump showed our truck jacking forward, backward, trying to get around him. We couldn't. Eventually, as we're stuck, I said, okay, sound your horn, let him know it's time to go. My student sounds the horn, and out of this truck comes this guy, hell-bent for leather, headed for our truck. One of the, backtrack a little bit, one of the rules I follow myself, or I used to when I still drove truck. I've been retired for just over a year.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. When you are backing a truck, your window is down. I do not care if it's snowing. I don't care if it's raining. You're wet. You can dry. If you get wet, you can dry off there. These things called towels.
Right.
They're wonderful inventions. But you need to be able to hear if somebody yells, stop, because you do not want to hit anything, especially you do not want to hit anyone.
Sure.
So this guy starts storming towards our truck. My student's window is all the way down, as it's supposed to be, as I instructed him to have it. It's cold outside, but it's dry. It's not raining or snowing. And my student says, now we've got a real problem. And this guy is just screaming as I'm not going to say what he was screaming because it's not fit for public consumption.
Right.
Let's just say there are a lot of curse words in there and calling a family lineage into question.
That's frowned upon.
As he gets close to the truck, I stand up to let the guy know that there's more than one person in here. And I also open up the drawer of the desk, which is where I kept my gun when I was laying down. I don't sleep with my gun on. And then as he got up to the truck, he grabbed for the mirror and started to put his foot up onto the step to get up to the window. And I yelled at the dude by best command voice I could muster, best volume I could muster. Dude, I've got a gun. The guy's eyes get, really big. He makes the O with his mouth.
Uh-huh.
And he turns around and goes back to his truck. I think, all right, it's over. He's retreated. No big deal. He puts his truck in gear and he leaves. And so I tell my student, okay, we're clear. Let's go.
Back up for just 1 second. When you warned him you were armed, which is perfectly legal in my opinion, because I think people who don't carry guns or don't travel with guns maybe don't realize, but it's a responsibility more than anything else. And so when deadly force is a ready option, it tends to keep you out of trouble, tends to keep you out of confrontations. But the bottom line is, had he come in the cab, had he climbed through the window or dragged the guy out, that is, and we'll get into this later, I'm sure, not just your work truck, that's your residence while you're on the road. So technically,
very much so,
I would imagine this would be considered burglary on top of whatever assault he was planning on committing. So when you have a firearm on your person or readily available to you, I don't see any problem with letting people know, hey, I am armed. And what that should put in their head is, doesn't mean I'm going to shoot you, but if things get bad enough, that's an option. It's on the table. Did he see the gun, or do you know offhand?
He couldn't have. It was in the drawer. I mean, it was all it would have taken would have been to drop my hand down, pick it up, put the magazine in, rock the slide. But he couldn't have seen it because it was in the drawer.
Okay. So this guy pulls out and you figure, okay, everything's cool. That de-escalated. Let's go on our way. We got our gas. Let's go.
Got our diesel. But yeah, that's the one thing with truck drivers you will find is you never, ever, ever, ever put gas in a big truck.
Yeah, I actually knew that. My late brother was a long-haul truck driver, and he told me that same thing when I was a kid. By the way, I'm the guy in the Toyota Highlander who, when you turn your turn signal on, I'm going to slow down and flash you to go ahead and get over and give you that room.
Okay.
A funny aside, don't call it gas. My father was a submarine captain, and when people called that little thing that spun behind the submarine a propeller, it drove him nuts. It's a screw.
That's let me, for anybody out there who is what I would term a gun aficionado. If for anybody who's in the gun community and has been there a while, saying putting gas in a big truck is very much like saying I'm going to put the clip in the gun.
Oh no, that's frowned upon.
Yeah, we leave, and the guy that was coming to beat the hell out of my student leaves first. We follow him, and he turns west on Interstate 80. So do we. And
several miles following him, you just happen to be behind him.
Yeah.
Right.
And several miles down the road, we pass him. And then several more miles down the road, like 20, 30 minutes down the road, my student says, hey, I think we're about to get pulled over. Okay, well, we did get pulled over, and it was the state police. And they asked if I had a firearm. I guess, of course I do. And I also informed them that I had a concealed carry permit. And, we did the full interview process separately with me and my student. He goes, well, let's get this all cleared up. This other driver is back a little ways, and let's all get this all cleared up. We'll just take you back there. We'll talk to the deputy sheriff that's back there, who's actually, this is their case because it's their jurisdiction, and we'll get everybody on their way. That's fine. We locked the truck up in a secure spot, and everybody went back there. The state trooper took possession of and I want to make sure, absolutely, this is going to become important later, be absolutely clear about it, is a matte black stock Glock model 22 40 caliber semi-auto.
Okay. Bone stock right out of the box.
Yep. No modifications whatsoever, not even the sights. We all travel back to where the county sheriff deputy was, and the state trooper says, why don't you go ahead and step out, speaking to me specifically, not to my student. Why don't you step out? Let's speak to the deputy. As I step out of the car, the first words out of the deputy's mouth were, "Sir, put your hands behind your back." I said, "Am I under arrest?" "Yes, you are." Those are the last words I said to any law enforcement that night.
Yeah, I don't blame you. So tell us, was your student released at that point? And was he able to carry on without you? Okay.
He was able to go. Yes.
Okay. So he slapped the cuffs on you and they take you to, I assume, either a sheriff's station or a county jail. And what were you charged with?
With terroristic threats was the big one. That's 50 years. Felony with a firearm is 50 years and terroristic threats was 5 years.
Wow.
And forgive me, this has been several years ago. This is not yesterday in my memory.
Sure.
And between that time and this time, I have had a stroke.
Okay.
And so my memory isn't what it was even a year ago.
Well, I just met you, but you sound super sharp to me. So, the felony with a firearm, that's a state charge in Nebraska, and that's a possible 50-year sentence, and tack on another 5 for terroristic threats. And
yes.
I already have a huge problem with both of these. If you didn't brandish it, and especially if you just informed him you're armed and didn't threaten him in any way, I don't know how you can call that a threat.
Well, here's the whole thing. Let me shorten the whole story is incredibly long, but let me shorten it up a little bit. What where the terroristic threat came from is the person, and I to this day I cannot remember that person's name. I remember I could not pronounce it. Neither could anybody in court because A, he never showed up, and B, the people who the district attorney and the people in court all referred to him as Mr. O because nobody could. It was a Middle Eastern sounding name, but I couldn't. There's no way I could pronounce it.
Okay,
and they didn't even try. But what he told them is that I had a chrome revolver that I had gotten out of the truck and came around the front of the truck, was waving in his face and screamed at him, "Do you want to die tonight?"
That's very dramatic.
The only thing is a chrome revolver. How do you get, knowing what I've been through Masada U Group's Mag 40 multiple times.
Right.
I've been through a lot of other training. One of the things you learn when you go through training is weapon fixation. You'll find when people are injured in a defensive encounter, one of the most common injuries is from getting shot in your gun hand.
Right.
The reason that is everybody focuses on the gun, and descriptions of the gun are often quite vivid because the focus goes right there. How do you get from a matte black rock stock Glock 22 in black to a chrome revolver?
For folks who don't know much about guns, and I assume we have quite a few of those listening who aren't familiar with firearms intimately, it'd be like if you went to a restaurant and you ordered a plate of spaghetti and they brought you steak and potatoes, and they're like, looks same. I mean, pretty much the same thing, right? Nope. Right. It's not even close. These two things are very, very different. And I speak from experience. Before I was in law enforcement, when I was a manager of a movie theater, I've told the story before, I had a Glock of some kind pointing right in my face. And I can testify to the fact that you absolutely, you're staring right at that barrel. You can't help yourself. And that thing looked like a shotgun barrel to me. And I'll never forget it. I will never forget that mental image is so burned into my brain. I couldn't forget it if I was hypnotized. So at some point you go to court, they charge you with these things. And what's your defense attorney telling you at this point?
Well, let me to add a couple things here.
Sure.
In this little town in Nebraska, arraignment court is held once a week, and that is on Wednesday. And this happened on a Friday evening.
Oh no.
So I sat in there until Wednesday. And Friday evening, I called my wonderful wife. Thank goodness I had a debit card that had money on it, and I'd memorized my numbers because they wouldn't let me have my wallet. They wouldn't let me have my cell phone. And you could only make local collect calls.
What year was this?
From
Paul?
This phone? That was a little over 5 years ago. So I set for 5 days. The one phone call I was able to make, I called my wife, Susan, and truck drivers make okay money, but I was by no means rich. I was not well-to-do. I did okay. At the point, I had a podcast called the Polite Society Podcast. We had a pretty good following. Was it the biggest podcast in the history of the world? No. But we had about 20,000 listeners. I did okay.
That's actually above average. So yeah, it's well above average.
I was incredibly embarrassed, humiliated that I'd been arrested. The first thing I told my wife was, don't tell anybody. We will fix this. We'll make it work somehow, but I don't want this getting out. I don't want, I'm really, really scared.
Yeah.
And at this point, I'm even though it's been years, I get a little emotional because my wife is a much, much smarter person than I am.
Yeah. Welcome to the club.
And she knew that despite what I'd asked her, that we were in over our head, and she reached out to a lot of people like Masada Ayub, like Kathy Jackson, a fantastic trainer who has since retired, but like Frank Fiamingo, who's an awesome personal friend of mine who used to run New Jersey Second Amendment Society. And that started a groundswell of financial support that was absolutely needed. They started raising money, and the reason that's important is because when it came to the bail hearing, my wonderful sweetheart was able to hire a rock star attorney.
Oh, good. Part
of the outreach she did, we came into contact with the people with the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. And I need to make clear that they did not, because they couldn't. I wasn't a member at the time of the incident. They did not financially help me through the company, but they were able to give me access to lists of lawyers they recommend. And that got me to this absolute, again, rock star of an attorney that Susan hired. And he was able to stand up for me. And again, long story short, eventually the charges were dropped with prejudice, meaning they could never be brought up again.
I just don't understand how the deputy who initially charged, or didn't charge, deputies can't charge you, but applied to charge you for these crimes. How just for example, just the disparity between his description of your gun and what your gun actually was and what it looked like is so extreme that I don't know how that didn't play into his decision, but I don't know the deputy. I don't know what was going through his mind at the time. And especially like with the arraignment, I mean, I don't know. I just have a problem with the whole thing. I don't like the charge. I don't like the fact that you were, detained for 5 days. I'm not sure about the legality of that. If I arrested somebody in Southern California or in Arizona, I had to be in the office of the prosecutor the next day. and they were usually arraigned within 24 hours. I know it's remote, but I'm not sure how they got away with holding you for 5 days without bond. Was there even bond at that point prior to your
No, the
arraignment?
bond hearing was 5 days from
Oh.
when I was arrested.
Yeah, due process, part of that is speedy. It's supposed to be speedy, and that doesn't sound very speedy to me at all.
It did not sound speedy to me sitting in 5 days amongst people. Let's face it. I very much believe in our, I used to call it justice system. Now I call it a legal system.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to say north of 90% of the people in jail deserve to be there.
Okay. I'll agree with that.
There are people like myself who get in there short term that do not need to be there, that should not be there.
I've seen that before too. I tell the story of a guy at the border that had some dope in his car, and ordinarily it'd be kind of a slam dunk case, but he actually presented us with sufficient information that I believe that he was tricked into taking the drugs across the border. It's the only time it ever came across my desk, but I called the prosecutor, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I talked to a duty assistant U.S. attorney, and he's like, "Yeah, just bring him in. We'll figure it out." And I said, "I'm sorry, what?" Just bring him in. We'll figure it out is not a legal standard. I need probable cause to arrest someone, and I didn't feel like I had it. And we kind of had it over the phone for quite a few minutes, and I finally had him talk to my supervisor. But that kind of cavalier attitude, I mean, I know the cops and the prosecutors deal with arrests and the criminal justice system every day, but the person being arrested doesn't necessarily, and they deserve every benefit they are afforded under the U.S. Constitution, and none of that should ever be bypassed or shortcut or anything of the sort. So, Paul, tell me, you said eventually it was dropped. How long did it take? First of all, how long were you in jail? Was it just the 5 days? And then how long did it take for this to get resolved? And not to give you too many questions in a row, but then you don't live in Nebraska, so you've got to go back and forth for these hearings. Tell us about all of that. I'm curious. I don't need you to keep it a short story. This is an hour-long show or more.
Yeah. Well, and I have a secret weapon that helped me then and was just helping me now. She just stepped in and wrote me a short note that gave me reminders of it. This happened in 2016. She reminded me.
Okay.
And it was just the 5 days in jail was all I spent. When I went to the bond hearing, my wife had not yet paid the attorney, so he wasn't there. But I told the judge, look, I'm not in Omaha. And I believe I'm trying to say this exactly as I said it then. I don't live in Omaha, but I live in the area. I'm not a flight risk. I've had the same job for 15 years, Your Honor. If I'm able to bond out, I will be back for court. They did set a bond of $50,000.
Are there bail bondsmen available so you could put down the 10 or 20%, or is that not a thing?
So yes, I was able to bond out for $5,000. But anyway, and a huge hunk of that was money that people had donated to for my defense.
That's awesome. I love to hear it.
Another part of your how long did it take to resolve? It was almost exactly 6 months.
That's a long 6
months from
months.
the day I was arrested to the day the charges were dropped with prejudice.
That's a long 6 months. So just 5 days in jail. I say just 5 days in jail. I hated going to the jail to drop someone off for half an hour at a time, and I can't imagine sitting in there for 5. It's not like you're a hardened criminal, who's used to it, or who people are terrified to mess with. You're Paul the truck driver. It's not something you're anticipating happening, I'm sure. So did you want to give a shout out to the criminal defense attorney who helped you?
Again, it's been 5 years ago. I don't have my wallet right in front of me. I still keep his card in my wallet, Susan, what was the name of the attorney again?
James Davis?
Yes, that's right. James Davis was the name of the attorney. He's in Omaha. If you need a criminal defense attorney in Omaha, especially if it's a self-defense related thing, James Davis is absolutely and he's not cheap. His retainer was $10,000. And that only got me to trial. If we would have had to go to trial, it would have been another $5,000 a day at trial.
Yeah, this brings up another point. There's a ton of legal defense companies out there. Active Self-Protection is sponsored by Firearms Legal Protection. My buddy Terry Johnson comes every year to the ASP National Conference. He gives a couple of classes, and one of which is we're assuming a gun was used in a defensive encounter or fired. And in that event, he goes over with you, what to do, what to say, what not to say. Do you make a statement or not? What do you tell the 911 operator? All that stuff is so important. And I'm hoping to have Terry on the show at some point. If you travel with or carry a firearm, or even if you have one for home defense, I highly recommend Firearms Legal Protection. As you just heard from Paul, after the defensive gun use, it's too late. It's like trying to get health insurance after you get a cancer diagnosis. That's not going to work. They're not going to cover you. So you could save yourself a lot of money and heartache by having that protection, and it's not terribly expensive. It's worth every penny. So shout out to that attorney. I'm glad he did a good job. So tell us, since then, what have you been up to?
Well, I've last October, I had a heart attack and I had to retire from trucking. And then this spring, I've there have been other medical complications. As I mentioned earlier, I had a stroke, and so my life has changed dramatically. Thank goodness my brain is still sharp enough that I can talk Second Amendment, I can talk politics, and I've fallen into a job with the Second Amendment Foundation. I do their broadcasts for them. Matter of fact, I'm coming up. One thing I'm very excited about, we're going to be doing broadcasts from SHOT Show in January. We're going to be coming at you from SHOT Show daily. And I'm really excited about that coming up.
That's great. Yeah, we're going to be there. John, Neil, Steph, and I, the whole team's going to be at SHOT Show this year. So that could be a place where I get to meet you before I end up in South Dakota next year. I'd love to meet up and get a cup of coffee. And, if you want to have a big time internet celebrity on your show, I'd be happy to do that too. I'm just kidding, folks.
Let's talk when we wrap this one up. I think we don't even have to wait that long.
Absolutely. Paul, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Couple things I want to add real quick. I would have probably avoided all of the heartache I went through and 6 months of absolute hell, because even though you're out of jail, that doesn't stop the nightmares. Nope. That doesn't stop the worry. That doesn't stop your wife looking at you and damn well she's thinking, is he going to be here next week?
Right. Yeah, it's tough.
The first thing you need to do, if you even reach for your waistband, if you even say, dude, I've got a gun, if you are the first one to call the police, you are the victim in their eyes.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, one would hope that the investigating deputy or officer or whatever it was would have done a more thorough job. I mean, first of all, just having you, I assume you and your student both said the same thing to that deputy, and somehow he took the word of this other guy, even though he gave a completely incorrect description of the gun. The whole thing sounds like a travesty of justice. And yeah, that 6 months, as I said earlier, is the longest 6 months of your life. If you've never been pursued by law enforcement or sued by someone or whatever, that's a terrible feeling. I was wrongly sued years ago by a landlord. And even though I knew I was right, and this woman was completely full of crap and lying, and my wife knew, it was a terrible feeling. So that's just a few $1,000s small claim suit. So I can't imagine how much that's amplified at the risk of being in jail for years or decades. And man, when you said that thing about your wife and her, what she's thinking, That hit me hard. Yeah, that's really tough stuff. Paul, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. You've been a great guest, and I'm sure people will take some important lessons out of this. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
Hey friends, this is John Correa. If you like the podcast, if it is bringing you value, do me a favor. Just rate the podcast and leave us a rating and a review. It really helps us out.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Gutowski Files. Every week we sit down with Steve Gutowski, our friend from thereload.com, and we talk about some news of the day. I have to warn you in advance, ladies and gentlemen, it is family game night at my house, so you may hear some wild and crazy noises in the background. If so, I don't apologize because they're having a blast. Steven, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing all right. The Eagles just won, so
yeah, so did
my week's off to a good end.
So did my beloved football team, the Washington football team. You can't call it the other thing anymore. In fact, they
beat the Bucs.
Yeah, they beat Tom Brady and the Bucs. That's crazy. Yeah, I referenced them on social media earlier, and I wrote RE********************** NS to be on the safe side.
I don't mind the new name. Football team is kind of cool.
I kind of wanted football club, but no one asked.
Yeah, that might be even better actually.
So anyway, yeah. They're going to name it something dumb. I can tell you that already.
I'm sure.
The remaining
Snyder in charge.
The remaining choices are not great, and no one likes Dan Snyder. I hope he's listening. So, folks, thereload.com is your source for down the middle, fair, sober reporting on firearms issues of the day. We've been doing a lot of NRA stuff recently. In fact, last week, thank you, Stephen, you introduced us to your friend Tim Mack, who came on and did a very interesting interview about his book. So we're gonna leave the NRA alone for a week, give them a chance to catch their breath, and we're gonna discuss something else, which I think is very interesting. You wrote an article at thereload.com about a Supreme Court case that the Supreme Court is going to hear. They've agreed to hear it, which is telling in and of itself, the fact that they're willing to hear it. And it's about the very, very restrictive carry rules in New York State. So this article, folks, can be found at thereload.com. It's entitled Analysis, the Effects SCOTUS Striking Down New York's Gun Carry Law Would Have. So, Stephen, tell us why is this important to our listeners?
Yeah, well, so this is important for a number of reasons, actually. First off, this is the first big gun case that they've taken in a decade. Really. I mean, they took one last year, but it ended up being mooted because New York changed their law. This time around, you're likely to get a real ruling on the merits. And you'll probably get, in addition to the ruling about the gun carry law, a new standard on how to decide cases, all gun cases moving forward. So they're going to most likely tell the lower courts, hey, when you have a gun case, here's how we want you to decide it. But in the more specific case of New York's law, it's also likely that they're going to strike it down, and they're going to force New York and the other 7 states that have these kinds of restrictive may issue, they're called laws, where government officials basically get the last say as to whether or not somebody gets a permit. It's basically up to their discretion. They're probably going to strike those down. They're probably going to replace them with what's called shall issue laws based on the oral arguments that we heard just recently here in the case. And that's the kind of law that's most states have at this point. So you are probably, if you're listening to the show, you probably live in a state that has shall issue law right now. And so the Supreme Court seems poised to set that as the new minimum standard for gun laws going forward as far as concealed carry is concerned.
You had Wendy Hoffman on your show. I had her on one of my shows recently. She's out in San Diego, and she is doing really outstanding work as it relates to the San Diego County Sheriff's Department and their the way they decide to issue gun permits. And for the longest time, it was up to the sheriff. You know, he could just say yes or no based on kind of nothing, just on his whatever judgment. There was no, he had to provide a reason. And if he didn't think the reason was good enough, of course, he wasn't sitting at his desk, you know, reviewing CCW applications, but I'm sure he told whoever was doing that what he thought was worthy or not. She's done some great work out there, and they've gone from 1,000 CCW permits to 5,000. And I'd like to think this decision will affect not just San Diego and New York, but the whole country, and that we could see a real revolution in how people are able to carry guns. On how these CCW permits are issued. Could you really quick describe for the people who aren't super duper gun people the difference between may issue and shall issue?
Yeah, certainly. Now, that's a great example of a state and how it operates under may issue, because California is also may issue. So it's only 8 states that have this law, but 25% of the population of the United States lives in those 8 states because they include some rather large states.
Right.
But San Diego County, right, they treat their process more like a shall issue process, where basically the difference is if you go through the permit application process, you pass the background check, you do the required training to get the permit, they have to give you the permit. And with the may issue, it's just that last step that's different. They don't have to give you the permit, even if you pass the background check and complete the training. They could still deny you based on whatever they want, essentially. Usually there's something called a good reason clause in the law, which is exactly what New York's lawsuit is over, this suit over their law. It's the good reason clause, and it says the applicant has to have a good reason as judged by whoever is issuing the permit. In New York, it's county judges. In California, it's sheriffs. So it's essentially up to their discretion, up to whatever they think somebody has a good reason or not. And oftentimes, as we've seen over and over again in California, that leads to a lot of bribery and abuse, abuse with these kinds of systems. Now, you have shall issue in the vast majority of states right now. So, where I live in Virginia is shall issue. Back where I'm from, Pennsylvania, near Philadelphia, that whole state is shall issue. Most states are shall issue. The second largest one actually is permitless carry, or constitutional carry, as some people call it, which you, as the name sort of implies, don't need any permit to carry in those states. And now there's 21 states like that. Texas just became a permitless carry state. And as long as you are legally allowed to own the gun, to possess the gun, you can legally carry it. Now, obviously, you can't break laws. You can't, you still have to follow all of the normal laws that you would have to follow if you did have a permit. But that's the difference between the 3 systems. The lowest level is permitless, where you don't need a permit at all. The middle is shall issue, where you have to go through this process, but as long as you check off the boxes that are required, you get the permit. And then there's may issue, where you have to go through the process, but at the end of it, you still might not get a permit. And in most states that have that law, they don't issue very many permits.
I was kind of stunned by one of the quotes in your article from Chief Justice Roberts, and I'm going to read that quote right now. Regardless of what the right is, it would be surprising to have it depend upon a permit system. You can say that the right is limited in a particular way, just as First Amendment rights are limited, but the idea that you need a license to exercise the right, I think, is unusual in the context of the Bill of Rights. And I couldn't agree more for once with Chief Justice Roberts.
Yeah, certainly you can see how people can make sort of assumptions or get inferences from what justices say during oral arguments. Because Robert said that. Now he also went back to this, and this is why I think they're more likely to go with shall issue than permitless, even though, as Robert says there, the idea of a permit at all raises some issues. But Roberts retreat a little bit to saying well, there's licensing and then there's licensing. That's his quote, which is basically, it's one thing to require a background check, but it's a different thing to just leave it up to the judgment of some government official and give them total discretion over the final decision. And so you had a number of justices raise this point, like Kavanaugh as well talked about it. And you had the plaintiffs asking for shall issue as their base level of what they want. And so it seems, listening through the oral arguments, like that's what they're leaning towards. And, the thing about it is there's only 8 states. There's a lot of people in those states, so it is a big deal. But I think instead of seeing some sort of dramatic shift after they strike down may issue laws, if that's what they do end up doing, you probably are still going to see a lot of states that try to restrict carry even in a shall issue system. So if you look at what DC did across the river from where I live, they were forced to adopt a shall issue law for gun carry a couple of years back by the federal courts. And then what they ended up doing was making the requirements to get the permit some of the hardest in the entire country as far as a shall issue regime goes, right? So you have to have specialized training that's only available in DC from trainers that are certified by the city, and they require a 16-hour course and fingerprinting. And so it costs several $100s to go through the process, on top of, obviously buying a gun that will cost you several $100s itself. And so they also restrict where you can carry the gun more so than a lot of other places. And we've seen a couple states do that as well, like Virginia, where I am, and Colorado is another one, where localities are allowed to make their own gun-free zones. So you end up with a lot of areas where you can't actually carry. In DC, they don't allow you to carry on the public transit system. So a lot of these things end up making it so that if you have enough money and time to go through the process, you'll still be able to get the permit. But it's going to be difficult if you don't have that money and you don't have that time, and you take public transit, for instance. You're still going to be pretty disadvantaged under what remains legal, even if they strike down a May issue regime. So
yeah, and ask yourself, folks listening at home, who needs a legal a permit to carry a gun more? The guy checking into his office at his 6-figure job, or the single mom riding the subway at 11 o'clock at night on the way back from her cleaning job? She's never going to get that permit in DC. We all know that. Let me just make a quick analogy, and then I got to let you go because they're going to start playing categories soon. I don't want to miss that. Recently, in the last, I say 20 years, you hear about free speech zones around, some political event. That drives me nuts. The United States is a free speech zone. There should be no cordoning off of people. Any public place, as long as you're following all the appropriate laws, should be an appropriate place to protest whatever. And the idea that you need a permit to exercise your First Amendment right should bother you as much as you needing a permit to exercise your Second Amendment right, or any other right for that matter. Oh, there goes my dog. I think it's time for categories. Steven, I got to let you go, buddy. Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll see you next week.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again.
Take care.